Welcome to episode number 1 of Talkin Blue, a new show hosted by myself, Cody Snavely, lead writer of DodgersBeat.com and contributor to the Bleed Los Podcast Network. Along with me is my co-host, Vince Samperio, who you guys might recognize from covering the Dodgers around the pond and various other outlets. Here, you can expect what you've gotten from us before, our honest opinions, in-depth analysis of all things related to the Dodgers. And we start during the most electric time of the offseason, the MLB winter meetings. But before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by DodgersBeat.com. Your go-to spot breaking Dodgers news, analysis, updates. If you want to stay locked in on everything happening in Dodger Blue, hit up DodgersBeat.com. Simple, fast, all Dodgers. And with me today, like I mentioned, and for the foreseeable future, is Vince Samperio, who everybody should know you by now, kind of covering the Dodgers for the last couple of years, on social media, YouTube, podcast presence. We haven't caught up with you this offseason yet. How have you been enjoying the feeling of being back-to-back champions as we get closer to the holidays?
Yeah, I think that's the best part when the Dodgers win is that, you're champion up until the next champion's crowned. And when you go back to back, obviously a lot different. I'm a guy that has a lot of different, I like to wear hats. I got a lot of different hats, but since the Dodgers won last year and since they won again this year, the LA hat is getting most of the love these days. So I love it.
Yeah, I think my wife doesn't like when they win as often as they've been winning. I got to explain to her why I have to add another hat to the collection. Hey, Yamamoto went off. Maybe I should add him to the jersey collection, stuff like that. So, she gets a little, angry around this time of year, especially with the holidays so close. It makes it easy to shop for me at least. So, but yeah, it's been a great offseason, even though it's been a little bit slow. We did get some huge signings at the winter meetings, like a lot of us were expecting. The big one for the Dodgers, we talked about it on the Bleed Los podcast a couple of days ago, was Edwin Diaz. The Dodgers clearly had a need heading into the winter, and that was the late inning relief role, specifically a closer and specifically a right-hander. And, Brandon Gomes, Andrew Freeman, and Dave Roberts kind of made that known. That was priority number 1 heading into the offseason, and they ended up getting the job done. So it was reported, still is not official. I imagine it's going to be official in the next several days. It's a 3-year, $69 million deal. So he signed for 2026, 2027, and 2028. It's $3 million more than what the Mets offered. And John Heyman reported today that there were 4, possibly 5-year offers out there on the market, and he still opted to sign with the Dodgers. So I think that speaks to kind of the relationship they built in just that fast, short week to get him to sign here. Your overall impressions, I mean, we knew the Dodgers could shock us and make a move. And obviously the easy one to say would be Edwin Diaz because it checked off every single box. But, Andrew Freeman historically with the team hasn't given out long-term deals or multi-year contracts to relief pitchers. He does it yet again, back-to-back years, this time with Edwin Diaz, who is arguably probably the best closer in baseball right now. Your reactions to the deal? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What are you feeling with Diaz and the Trumpets coming to Dodger Stadium?
It's hard not to like it. And this comes off last year when they signed Tanner Scott. I was excited. I was glad, but I also had a little bit of hesitancy in the back of my head just because he hadn't done it as long as maybe some other guys have. And for a reliever, when volatility is the name of the game, you want to have a proven track record. So at the very least, you could feel more comfortable about it. That's where Edwin Diaz comes in. He's had, hit or miss seasons twice when he first got to New York, but then he figured it out. Last year, wasn't amazing, but was still pretty solid overall. And that was coming off a freak injury when he was celebrating during the World Baseball Classic in 2023. So, yeah, it was exciting. It was, the Dodgers continue to flex their muscles, continue to, to throw the dollar bills like Leo DiCaprio and Wolf of Wall Street with the fun coupons. And it makes sense. And it's kind of funny because going into the season last year, we might have thought that the Dodgers bullpen was going to be a strength. That didn't end up ever really coming to fruition at all until they started throwing starters into the bullpen. And that's when it kind of became a strength of sorts. So you go out there and you get the best reliever on the market and you get him at a deal that, when he opted out, a lot of people assumed he opted out to get more years or to get more money. And yeah, he got the money. He didn't get more years. The more years were out there. And it just goes to, for me, it proves that once the Dodgers get to, if there ever is a payroll or some kind of crazy number on the luxury tax where teams treat it as a de facto salary cap, people are just going to pick the Dodgers anyways.
Yeah, I think that's kind of getting into the discussion, especially if other moves go down. They're still interested reportedly in Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, and several other free agents and trade candidates. So clearly a salary cap won't really hinder the Dodgers. And I've made my thoughts known on this. I don't really think there is going to be a salary cap implemented into the sport. I think the Players Association has made that very apparent that they would go against that. And so however many games that means that they miss, I do ultimately think they end up compromising with each other and then doing some type of penalties more severe than what they currently are right now. So speaking of penalties, that's the other thing with the Diaz contract. He was offered the qualifying offer, rejected it from the Mets. So the Dodgers not only lose a couple draft picks, they do lose $1 million in their international bonus pool money. Something that does, I believe, upset Andrew Friedman a little bit because, he does come from the Tampa Bay Rays where he builds his teams through draft, player development, and he still does that in Los Angeles because we have the #1 ranked farm system per MLB pipeline heading into this winter. And he's used that for trade capital to bring in other guys, which we'll definitely get into later, which is the big one that we're hearing about. But, the other part of this deal is that there is deferred salary. And even with the deferred salary, Diaz still kind of checked the box off what he wanted to get. He gets 2 years and $38 million, or he opted out of that $38 million. Now he gets $31 million guaranteed and an extra year on top of that because he only had, 2 years remaining on that 5-year initial contract. He also resets the all-time record for a relief pitcher in terms of AAV, which is around $23 million. He said it when he signed that Mets contract, and it was around $20-ish million, $21 million. So if you're an agent, you're checking off boxes here, and then he goes to a destination that I imagine was probably on the top of his bucket list. You hear about the story, I believe Jack Harris put it out there, and a lot of other people start connecting the dots as well. His brother played for us, and that's something we brought up on the past live. Former players and current players speaking about their time playing in the Dodgers, especially when you've heard about what's going on in the Mets clubhouse, that has to go for something more than just the dollars and years.
Yeah, you don't want to be part of environment where you don't want to go to work every day. Well, as a baseball player, there's a lot of us that maybe have jobs that, maybe you don't want to go to work every day. But as a baseball player, you don't want to be part of that. And yeah, every day, or it feels like every other day, a new Mets story comes out. And, they've lost Diaz now. They've lost Pete Alonso now. And, Lindor's name is now being brought up as something that could potentially, be something down the line in terms of being available. But yeah, for the Dodgers, and this is, I've always praised Dave Roberts for this, is that the clubhouse has never been a public issue. If there was an issue, we've never heard about it. The players, even with all the personalities and guys they've had, and young guys that are thrust into roles that maybe they wouldn't be if they were on a lesser team, all that goes on, we don't ever hear about it. It appears that everyone loves Dave Roberts in terms of the players, and that's part of it. And when you go to this is why I like the Dodgers. You're going to LA, so you're going to the best weather in baseball. You're going to a stadium that's going to have 40K every night. You're going to a team that cares about winning. You're going to a core that's already won 2 now. It's just everything lines up, and I can see why fans of other teams wouldn't like us, because I didn't like the Yankees in the late 90s, early 2000s. But guess what? I was watching every World Series they were in to see if they would lose, and I think that's where we're at with the Dodgers, and it's good for baseball.
Yeah, we've made that apparent where, whatever the Dodgers do, especially bringing in elite talent, continuing to make the postseason and deep runs in October, they have a target on their back. So that means 29 other teams around the league. They're essentially just hate watching, which is fun, especially being the back-to-back champions. You can't really argue with the Dodgers right now until you beat them. And so far over the last 24 months, that just hasn't happened yet. And it's looking like this team is going for a three-peat. Kind of last notes on Diaz here. Dodgers, I brought this number up on the live a couple days ago. They blew 27 saves last year. Wasn't the league leader or the MLB lead, which is surprising to me just because of how many times we saw them get opportunities and blew it late. Even if you convert just half of those, you're looking at the team having the best record, not just in the National League, but in Major League Baseball. So that is something that the Dodgers clearly circled. And, one of the guys that was mostly responsible for that was Tanner Scott. And I do think him transitioning to a role that he has been more familiar with in his career, which is a lefty specialist and high leverage guy, I think that's going to be better for him in 2026 and for the rest of that contract. I think Dave Roberts is going to benefit from working backwards now. He's got the starting rotation, and when they're healthy, they're able to go 6-7+ innings every start, especially in October. And Diaz is a guy that can get you at least 6 outs. So it's the first time in a long time the Dodgers have had a full-time closer. Kenley Jansen's the last guy. I'm not even going to count Craig Kimbrell or anything in that. Kenley Jansen in 2021 was the last, bona fide closer that Dave Roberts had to use. Now you have your 9th inning guy. You have your 8th inning guy. You also have a lot of starters, and you also have a lot of, relievers that were a part of the team last year. They're going to have to essentially battle for spots. So isn't it funny how quickly the Dodgers bullpen went from being like a question mark just a couple of days ago to now it's like, man, they have so many options that it's one of the biggest strengths in the sport.
Yeah, so many options that could potentially be used for other things that I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a strength for the Dodgers now. And that kind of, shifting gears here, you mentioned using that position strength and especially for the trades, but 2 guys that have been involved in a lot of trade rumors recently have been fan favorites, cornerstone pieces of this back-to-back run, even though one of them wasn't involved in October of 2024. And that's Teoscar Hernandez and Tyler Glasnow. So each of their name has kind of been thrown around in trade conversations over the last, I would say, like couple weeks, even leading up to the winter meetings. We heard Ken Rosenthal mention, Teoscar's name, and then we started hearing rumblings about a potential Glasnow deal, and that's continued even post winter meetings where his name has been mentioned. Are you surprised that the Dodgers are shopping not just one, but maybe both of those guys?
No, I'm not surprised. Just Teo more so, and Glasnow in the context that he's been brought up makes sense. With Glasnow, it's in the context of someone like a Tarik Skubal or someone of that ilk where you're going after big game hunting. And this is the thing with the Dodgers, like a lot of their MLB ready prospects are guys that are already in the big leagues or are maybe graduated from prospect status, but they're still young in the game. And that's kind of where the Glasnow part would come in is, hey, you want a guy, this guy's got 3 years, he's can be an ace. He maybe doesn't have the track record of being healthy all the time, but if you really go back and piece together everything, it's not one like lingering issue. It's just he has a big body, and sometimes it's not built for 30 starts a year. But yeah, Teo probably makes less sense in the point that the Dodgers need outfielders, and getting rid of an outfielder without necessarily knowing what's coming back to you is a little bit questionable. But obviously, if we got to a point where Teoscar Hernandez was more in rumors or even traded, you don't expect the front office to just be like, oh, we're not going to have a plan of who the outfielder is that we're bringing in. Whether it's someone like the Kyle Tucker market becomes something more of what they want, or even the Cody Bellinger market becomes something more of what they want in less years, or they whatever they get back from Teo, they use that to go get another outfielder. Like there's a lot of possibilities, and I think the Dodgers, with the core that they have, in the like Ohtani, Yamamoto, Snell, Sasaki pitching, Mookie, Freddie, Ohtani, and Edman, guys like that are signed already for a few years. You can see what else is out there.
Yeah, I think, I've kind of talked myself into understanding the Teoscar trade rumors. I know Kevin, if he's watching this, I went back and forth with him on social media. It is understandable why the Dodgers could likely be looking to get off the Teoscar contract. It's kind of weird because I feel like when they did sign him to the extension, or when they re-signed him last offseason, you should have kind of known what you were getting, a subpar defensive outfielder who is really just known for his bat, and you knew you were getting him into his mid-30s. So I feel like that could possibly just be buyer's remorse from the Dodgers front office on types of things. Even with him having a down season last year, he does have 25 to 30 home run potential. He missed some significant time last year with the groin injury and the toe injury. So he still hit 25 bombs. You're probably looking at a 30 home run pace if he plays a full season. And even before the groin injury, I remember he was really, really hot. I think his batting average was over 300. He looked fine out there in right field. Not the best, but, at least league average or slightly below, not the -9 outs above average that we've seen, throughout the entire sample size this season. with his contract, though, it's not entirely, it's not unsexy. $26 million over the next 2 seasons, $23.5 million in deferred salary. He does have that club option or that mutual option, I believe, or I think it's a club option in 2028, or they can just buy him out. So if you're a team like the Kansas City Royals, who were mentioned as being interested and need outfield help, he could be a guy that you take a chance on and you're not really paying too much on. But I just feel like if you don't have something else cooked up, because the Dodgers, like you said, they're already short an outfielder. They need an outfielder. Tommy Edman, how realistically is he going to play center field at the start of the year? I would probably say doubtful. If you're really going to ask me if he's going to play there at all in the following year, especially coming off that ankle surgery, I would say close, probably in like the lower percentage chance of that happening. I think the Dodgers, if you're smart, you try to get a center fielder at least. I think all this stuff can be put to bed as long as you just move him to left field. I like Teoscar. I do believe that I like his vibe in the clubhouse. I've talked to him. I've seen what he does in there in my brief time covering the team on the East Coast. I think, you look at what he did in the postseason, those types of hitters, I think he was second or third in OPS and homers on the Dodgers in their October run. These type of hitters don't grow on trees. And we've seen the Dodgers bring in guys that are regular season, performers, but when the lights shine brightest, they usually don't show up. And, call me a sucker, but Teoscar Hernandez, a lot of his hits from the postseason these last 2 seasons are kind of ingrained in my memory. So maybe that's my fan side of me talking a little bit more, but I do think, and correct me if I'm wrong if you think this way as well, just move him to left field and work it out from there.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for him to be traded by any means. I just can understand where they're coming from. But yeah, I mean, we obviously there was times where we didn't love Teoscar Hernandez, mostly on the defensive side, a couple of times on the offensive side. But yeah, he came through, the big home run against the Phillies, like that could have potentially been, not just a game changer, but a series changer. Like that was game 1. The Phillies played very well in that series overall, but it was just, one hit there, one error here, whatever it was, that kind of added up to the Dodgers, winning that series. But yeah, it's they need an outfielder. You move Teo to left. You can, the Dodgers had Hanley Ramirez play left field at one point. Like he won't be as bad. And, he's not going to play in the World Baseball Classic. He understands, like, he needs the rest and everything else. And, I'll chalk it up to those injuries were kind of lingering. He hit well enough in the postseason, and I don't, I still want him here.
Yeah, I think I'm also going to chalk it up to the injuries. Call me a sucker for that. That's a very probably easy excuse to put that he himself won't admit. But, even at my young age of 26, I get some shoulder pain, knee pain, all that types of stuff. That can impact my day-to-day at my day job. Can't imagine what it's doing when you're trying to hit 95 plus mile per hour fastballs. I'm going to bet on Teoscar to have a better season offensively. Defensively, I think you get what you get. There's really not much else he can improve on. Like, I think David Vassay on Dodger Talk, I did look at the photos on Instagram that Teoscar's been posting. Does look like he's been trying to lose a little bit of weight. So tell you, if you lose 10 to 15 pounds, get a little bit more in shape and then get healthy and finally rest, I think that's going to do wonders for Teoscar. And I think moving into left field, I think it's a less demanding spot, especially at Dodger Stadium. Not as much ground to cover, all that types of stuff. And like, I know you got the short porch, so you can kind of give up on some home runs that are hit down the left field line if you're Teo. He's not going to wow you there. I think you look at the contract, you look what he's owed, you look what he means to the team in the clubhouse. I think there's too many intangibles to move him away. The only other side of this is maybe they're shopping. Is there some type of disconnect like between him and the front office? Because he's been very adamant about playing right field. A lot of the fans, and I bet you the coaching staff and the front office wants to move him to left field, but they don't want to like piss him off essentially. So that's the only other thing that I could think of is maybe there's just some type of, headbutting there between the two, but you can never really tell that. At the end of the day, I think if he's not traded by the holidays, he will be on the Dodgers roster. Whether it's in right field or left field, I think that's TBD.
Yeah.
But kind of moving on here, continuing the outfield market. Cody Bellinger, Kyle Tucker are the two most logical, guys that a lot of people have been pointing to. We also have Harrison Bader news, Brendan Donovan, utility player from the St. Louis Cardinals. But according to The Athletic, Katie Wu and Fabian Ardaya, the Dodgers still prefer Tucker on a short-term high AAV deal. Some people that I've talked to that have kind of followed, that were at the winter meetings, they still believe the Dodgers are in play for Tucker signing a short-term deal with an opt-out, similar to what Alex Bregman signed for last offseason, similar to what they offered Bryce Harper back in 2019. Are you buying that, or do you think a team is going to shell out, a multi-year offer, $400 million for Tucker? Especially Bellinger's market too, I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, every year I think eventually the money's going to be too much. Eventually teams are going to, not necessarily collusion, but there's going to be a point that it reaches where, hey, we're not going to give out that much money, and no one's going to give out that much money. And hey, if you're a free agent, you got to deal with it and pick from there. I think this might be the way they reach the point. Like everything points that way because the lockout is looming, because, Kyle Tucker, as good as he is, it's easy to find question marks about him with, he's just a different personality than maybe some teams would want out of, because when you get into the tier of like 350, 400 mil, it's not just the player, it's like everything that comes with it. Even Mike Trout, as people can say he was boring, like he had a little bit of personality. He's out in the, community. He's, doing all these things that maybe he doesn't want to do, but he's part of it. And like Kyle Tucker, you never really see him out there like that. So, teams could factor that. I mean, we just saw the Reds say that they offered money to Kyle Schwarber because they thought he could sell tickets, and then they're not going to spend money on anyone else because I guess I don't think anyone else can sell tickets out here. So, or good teams don't sell tickets apparently. So, I think this might be the year where, hey, he's not going to get it. There's not going to be the market for that. And this is the year the Dodgers could be like, hey, here's a nice, you want 4 years, that's enough, but you can opt out after this year or wait and see what happens with the lot. Like, I don't know. There's different ways to go about it. And Bellinger too, like, any team should be weary of giving him too much money, like even over 150 mil, just because he's had good years. He's had really good years. He's had okay years. He's had solid years. I think he's to the point where he's a solid major league player and he's not going to give you negative value anymore. But do you want to pay someone like that 25, 30 mil a year? I don't think so.
Yeah, and I think that's been the holdup. And we've seen some reports coming out from, Yankees Twitter. Basically, I think Boris wants to wait until Tucker signs and then kind of go off that for Bellinger. Bellinger, if you look at his 3-year sample size, he actually has been a really good player. A lot of that WAR and, his WRC plus numbers, they came from 2023, unironically enough, where he posted his best numbers. I believe he had a 123 WRC plus with the Cubs that season. Last year with the Yankees, we saw the home run power come back. How much is that due to, the Yankee Stadium, short porch out there in right field? Not sure. I know if you look at the expected home run numbers, they were kind of on par to where his final total, ended. But I think it's going to be interesting to see if either of those guys get the contract that they're looking for. I feel like Bellinger is similar in that Pete Alonso territory where, Pete went to the free agent market last year, didn't get the deal he wanted until this year. The Orioles finally coughed up the money because they needed him. But Pete's had more of a proven track record, and he plays a position that's, pretty easy. You just throw the ball over there. Even though he's not a good defensive first baseman, he's suitable over there. Bellinger I like because he's versatile, can play left field, center field, right field. I think he would be fine if the Dodgers signed him and put him in center field. I think he can still do that there. And then down the line, you can put him at first. But I'm just still worried about, giving a guy, like you said, $25 to $30 million, and 21 and 22 are still pretty fresh in my mind. I've seen how well Bellinger can be, like 2019, 2017. That's the peak. What Bellinger is a team going to get? And I think that's why he's still here out in the open market with not many, contract rumors or pursuits of teams. We're kind of just still hearing the early rumblings. I've kind of made it known who my preferred outfielders are. I do like Jarren Duran, even though he kind of profiles more as a platoon. I'm interested, out of all the names you've heard of, Stephen Kwan, Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, others, which one are you, if you were Andrew Freeman, which one are you targeting specifically?
Yeah, I get torn because obviously there's guys that are good for a team, and then there's guys that are fun to watch. Jarren Duran's fun to watch. Personally, like I've talked to him a few times. He's a great guy. He's fun. Obviously he has a couple of the on-field things that are more so just like controlling yourself a little bit.
Don't bring a tennis racket if you come to Dodger Stadium when he plays there.
Like Stephen Kwan can be fun as a baseball purist, but like Steven Kwan's not gonna hit the ball over the wall. Steven Kwan is, gonna hit you singles and a couple doubles here and there. That's not as fun to watch. But does it work for the Dodgers? Yeah. I think I like Duran just because he's available. They traded with the Red Sox before. The Red Sox have some of the trades they've made with the Red Sox, and they have new ownership or new GM, president, whatever they have over there now. So it might be different. But like obviously the Mookie trade didn't give him much. The trade we just made for Dustin May, like they got a guy that was drafted in the first round recently. Like it's been kind of interesting where that's at. But yeah, like Quan Donovan, like we already have a guy like that. His name's Tommy Edman. I don't need, and as good as Tommy Edman's been in the postseason, and I'm sure I've tweeted or said, man, give me a lineup full of Tommy Edmans when he does something good in the postseason. I don't want to watch a lineup full of Tommy Edmans necessarily. So I think that's where I'm at. Like the Dodgers are just going to go be the big bad Dodgers. Go be the big bad Dodgers with the big personalities too.
Yeah, I think, the Dodgers can make the move for some guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get any of those names I mentioned. That would be very Dodger-esque. Find somebody else or maybe take a chance on, Alex Call, who I like, kind of baller dude. I've talked to him when he was on the Nationals. Pretty cool guy. We've talked to him before as well on the channel. But I think if you give him a shot, Ryan Ward, I feel like this kid's been given an opportunity now. He's on the 40-man roster. He's won the PCL MVP last year. If the Dodgers end up holding on to him, maybe throw him out there in the mix. I think the Dodgers are going to be smart, and they're really probably just going over all their options because I think what we're going to talk about, switch gears to now, is the one that's probably making the most noise and the most smoke that's out there, and that is a potential trade for Detroit Tigers ace Tarik Skubal. That's a guy that I was pushing for not last season in 2024. They ended up opting to keep him there, and then they got Jack Flaherty instead. Ended up working out for both teams because the Tigers made the playoffs. Dodgers won the World Series, so win-win for everybody. Now we're getting to the point where the Detroit Tigers, for whatever it is, do not want to give him the money that he rightfully deserves, which is kind of surprising because we've seen the Tigers under, the older, previous, owner, the father of the team, Little Caesars himself. We've seen him give contracts to Prince Fielder, Miguel Cabrera. You have a generational talent. In my opinion, this is where I bring it up. You pretty much have the heir apparent to Clayton Kershaw in terms of left-handed generational pitcher. He's right in the prime of his career, 29 years old, is probably seeking an 8 to 10-year deal after he's a free agent. Dodgers have been connected to him in trade rumors recently. It all started with, a tweet from a KTLA guy. I forget his name off the top of my head. Do you remember it? No, yeah. So, but his report did get, kind of verified by Bob Nightingale saying that they were discussing trades. They were, throwing out prospects and packages, but nothing really ever kind of hit the floor or hit the ground running. And they never really kind of went far beyond that. We've seen kind of reports out from Katie Wu. We've seen Fabian Ardaya and kind of Ken Rosenthal. All these guys kind of start to suggest it. I believe Jorge Castillo from ESPN, friend of the show, he put out today that he is kind of more in line thinking that Skubal is traded. If the Dodgers can make a deal like this happen, even if it's just a 1-year rental, are you prepared to kind of give up the cost that it's going to take, especially if it's obviously going to increase the Dodgers' chances at going for a 3P because you're getting one of the best players?
I'm all in. I'm all in on Tarik Skubal. There's a few guys that are like that, and he's one of them. And people might say it's only 1 year and he can get hurt and blah 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 and all this other stuff. But the Dodgers are like I don't want to be like everything's gravy right now, but it kind of everything's gravy right now. Like they've won back-to-back titles. You're set up for the long haul. This one trade, even if you traded. This wouldn't be the trade, but if you traded your top 5 prospects, the Dodgers would still be fine because some of those guys are going to go up. Some of those young guys that are younger are going to, in the next year or two, the Dodgers will be back into a top 5 farm system. Like this is the type of guy you go after. 1, because he's very, 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 very good. 2, because I feel like after they won in 2024, okay, you went and got, Blake Snell and Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates. Those they didn't all necessarily work how they were supposed to, but those were guys that were supposed to carry you over from the guys that are maybe a little fatigued from playing an extra month of baseball and having an extra month one less month of resting. And that's what Tarik Skubal would be. He'd slot in to your number one spot. Yamamoto could take, a month off if he really needed to at some point with, a hip flexor or whatever they want to call it. Everyone can kind of get that rest that they had. And then when you go into, and we just saw, you go into a playoff, game, and you have Tarik Skubal starting. As bad as the Tigers' offense was, they were in the mix of all those games he was pitching. And as bad as the Dodgers' offense was at times in the postseason, you trust that once they get it to the bullpen, and it's not going to, you would think, it's not going to take 15 innings to win because that's how long it took the Skubal starting game 5 for the Mariners to actually win. The Dodgers did go 18 innings, but this is the guy that you go for, and it's not going to hurt them. Even if it's Glasnow, Sheehan, and somebody else, I don't care.
Yeah, I'm kind of in lockstep with you on this too. It was the KTLA reporter was David Pingalore. He tweeted out day one that this was in discussions, which kind of made me throw a little bit of do we really know if that's really happening? Could have been a tweet out thrown in the air and ended up being true to some sense. David Vassay, he was on Dodger Talk yesterday. He said from what he's heard basically is that the Tigers are asking for a king's ransom, and rightfully so. He is a generational pitcher. He's, you're not going to get, a Tarik Skubal out in the open market this offseason. He's not available from any other team on a trade aspect. So he clearly is one of one. They want a package similar to what the Padres sent over to get Juan Soto, who was under 2 years of control. So 2.5 years of control in 2022 when they got him. I don't think the Tigers are going to get that just because one, Soto was a position player, and then two, he had, multiple years of control. And I don't think there's
Preller's the only one that's given up that haul. Every time we hear the Dodgers connected, someone's going to take a king's ransom. They've yet to give up anyone of real value.
Yeah, I think it's always shocking when you see a player that is as valued as high as Skubal or, out there. And then when they ultimately do get traded, people are always look at the trade package and be like, that's it. And that's kind of the reality of the situation if you're the Tigers. If you can't sign to an extension, are you really just going to let him ride out his final year and then lose him with a qualifying offer and get a complimentary draft pick? No, I mean, that would go over horribly. At the end of the day, a perfect world, I'll tell you this, a perfect world, they actually do sign him. I do like the ability of a star player playing his entire career there and playing there for, being a Kershaw, being the guy. I think if you're the Tigers, you just give him what he wants. I imagine the deal he's probably looking for, since he is 29, he'll be 30 when he goes into free agency. I kind of find it hard to him get a 10-year deal taken into his age 40 season. So maybe he gets an 8-year deal. The current all-time AAV leader is Scherzer at 43. So maybe he tries to beat that by a smidge at $44 million. Even that, an 8-year deal at $44 million is $352 million. That's a lot. I believe that would break every contract for a starting pitcher. I think Yamamoto currently holds it for the $325 he signed. So clearly, I still think the Dodgers, if they wanted to extend him, that they could do that deal and you could justify it just because of what he's done the last 2 years. I know he struggled, from making his debut in 2020, had injury issues and consistencies, but over the last 2 seasons, he's been arguably the best pitcher in baseball. 2.30 ERA, 2.47 FIP, 1.80 ERA plus, a whip under 1, so he doesn't walk guys. 10 Ks per 9. This is a guy that is elite. And I think what you mentioned is that come October, I think what really wins is just elite. Having elite players start games. The Dodgers pretty much cakewalked themselves to the World Series until they got up to the Blue Jays, where they gave them a run for their money going 7 games. The Dodgers starting pitchers, they dominated Philadelphia. They dominated the Brewers, and they did pretty well against the Blue Jays, whose offense was kind of revolutionized and one of the best in the sport. And they still did what they did for the past 2 months to end the season. So I think if you have starters that can go deep in October, you're talking about a rotation, if everybody's healthy, Skubal, Yamamoto, Snell, and then Ohtani. Ohtani would be the fourth starter, kind of the afterthought, which I think the Dodgers would probably prefer, honestly, to not have to depend on him like the Angels did. And like you said, if you get Skubal, who's basically made every start the last 2 seasons, he's hungry to win. And you can give a guy like Yamamoto a break. You can give a guy like Glasnow, if he's not involved in the trade, like a month off. Blake Snell did the same thing this past season. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense. In terms of trade package, you mentioned Glasnow, Sheehan, Robleski, all these other guys. You're comfortable with just giving up multiple pitching prospects, even if it affects the depth a little bit?
Yeah, for Skubal, yes, because like you said, at the end of the day, like they still have a starting rotation. They would have. You're really counting on, if a guy like River Ryan stays, you're counting on him to kind of come back from that injury. But the possibility of having what you have, and you can still go sign guys. Like you can still go sign some lower tier free agents, guys that are inning eaters or guys that are of that nature that are going to give you some relief or spot starts, like stuff like that. I think this is the one time where and I think it's just greediness, but like I don't care. Like a lot of people have been caping for Emmett Sheehan, and I like Emmett Sheehan, and he's done very well. But some people were caping for Landon Knack at one point, and then he didn't end up factoring into 2025 like he did in 2024. Ben Kasperius was really great to start of 2025, and then kind of fizzled out a little bit. Like with the young guys, you don't know. With Tarik Skubal, I know what I'm getting for a year, and I think I forget where it was that they talked about like the core of this team wants to like cement a dynasty and cement their legacy. That's what this does. It goes out and it gives you the best chance to do a three-peat, which I think is far much cooler than having a prospect in 3 years be pretty good.
I think one of the arguments I've seen thrown out there on like Twitter is that, the deal has to get done with an extension if you're going to give up that much. I don't actually think that's the case. And I don't think Andrew Freeman needs that to happen either. Let's not forget, he traded for Mookie Betts without an extension signed as well. Obviously, circumstances kind of forced the Dodgers and Mookie Betts' hand. The COVID pandemic kind of derailed things. Maybe Mookie Betts said, you know what, who knows if we're even going to play this year? Let me just sign the deal now while my value's at a really high price. And he ended up getting the job done. I don't think Andrew Freeman really cares about that. I think Andrew Freeman goes after elite talent. He didn't sign Max Scherzer to an extension, and he gave up a pretty good haul that ultimately didn't work out for the Nationals. If you've seen what their guys are going through, Josiah Gray and Gabriel Ruiz haven't really panned out. But, he's shown a willingness to be aggressive. I think my preferred package, I saw this being floated around. Emmett Sheehan is kind of like the young controllable guy that's under like arbitration numbers, so cheap. Tyler Glasnow, I feel like you have to get rid of one of your starters, and he seems to be the most expandable, or that you can get rid of. Throw in some cash to pay down some of his contract because he does have some injury history. Zaire Hope as one of your outfield prospects, I feel like he's the one that they probably would move on the quickest out of between him, Sirota, and DePaula. And then maybe like a lower level, like pitching prospect like Copen or something like that. I think that does get the deal done. And I think that gets the deal done. You don't even need an extension thrown in there. That'll be, pro bono if he does decide to sign that extension. And honestly, I could see it happening. I know he's a Scott Boras client, but who's to say he goes there? He's playing with superstars. They're all signed into contracts for the next, several years, besides like Freddie Freeman, whose contract I think has like 2 or a year left. You got a core, you got a chance to win a World Series. California, West Coast, Los Angeles, even if they defer the salary with this potential salary cap coming, this could probably be Skubal's last time to get that payday and get that figure he wants. I think the Dodgers would be willing to give it to him, especially if they get their hands on him.
Yeah, it all lines up. And again, the looming lockout or, CBA negotiations could change a lot of people's minds. One of them being Skubal. You see how much the guy wants to win when he plays. Scott Boras likes the money, but not all. There's been guys that have gone against him and not gone for the most money or given some kind of discount, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I know there's been a lot of smoke over the last couple of days. We'll see if there's any more progress on that. I imagine things will slow down as the holidays creep up and, these guys spend time with their families and whatnot. And then once things start to pick up, maybe they start to resume the trade talk, or who knows, maybe it happens when I go to bed tonight. So kind of moving on here and ending on it. We did get a few updates from the WBC. We've kind of been getting them throughout the entire week. Yamamoto, he will be playing according to a Japanese Yahoo article, he will be participating for Team Japan, going for the repeat. It was announced today. I know Dave Roberts and other members in the Dodgers org said they were okay with it. They would give him the blessing, but they kind of preferred jokingly that he didn't participate given to what the workload he did this past year. He's a competitor. He will go. The one that won't be participating is Roki Sasaki. He was announced on the preliminary roster, believe last week or 2 weeks ago. They actually opted not to keep him on because of past injury this season. I think that's beneficial for him. What say you?
Yeah, I know these guys, some of them are Team Japan, WBC might even be greater than World Series. And they've, Otani and Yamamoto and Sasaki already won the World Baseball Classic, so I don't know if that changes their mind at all. But yeah, for Roki, he had a weird year. It ended up being good at the end, but it wasn't good throughout most of it. And I'm sure he doesn't want that to happen again. I'm sure he wants to be in that rotation. I'm sure he wants to be good to go for the season to prove himself. And like I said, he's already proven himself in the World Baseball Classic. And the Dodgers probably just kindly requested, hey, you're young enough to where you're probably going to play in 2 or 3 more of these things. Maybe not play this one.
Yeah, I think, mentioned, like about, I believe at the beginning of the month when it was kind of out there when Otani announced, I said, well, maybe the other guys don't participate. Maybe they do want, a longer winter and kind of enjoy the off season. Maybe the Dodgers preferred that they didn't play, which I do still is kind of the case. But ultimately, these guys are competitors. They wanted to play. Yamamoto's playing. We mentioned Teoscar. He's not playing. Doesn't seem like Freddie Freeman's going to play. Team USA's roster is pretty much filled out on the infield wise. I don't imagine Mookie Betts is probably going to play this year either, especially after the down season he had, in 2025. Maybe he's looking to rebound, get some extra work at Camelback Ranch. But yeah, I think for Roki specifically, I mentioned out of all of them that I think shouldn't play, it was him. I think because he was thrown into 2 roles last year, they said he's going to be a starter. He needs to develop a third pitch. I think he has to do that in a controlled environment like spring training. Take a month, try to develop maybe that slider again. Right now, he's just a 2-pitch pitcher. He's got that fastball and that fork splitter, which is one of the best pitches in baseball. But like Kershaw said, if you're going to be a big league pitcher at this level, you have to have a third pitch to keep hitters honest. Because if not, you're going to see what you saw from Sasaki in the first half of the season when he was on the mound, which is a predictable guy, and maybe let the emotions get the best of him a little bit. But, when you don't have the variety that some of these other pitchers have, like Yamamoto, who has like 6 pitches, like Yu Darvish, another Japanese pitcher who has like 10, you got to keep these hitters off balance one way or another, because at the end of the day, anybody can tee up a fast fastball. That speed really isn't anything in this league right now.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as just flipping some grips for him or whatever it is. And we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, but other than that, we did have a few comments in the chat today as well. A lot of our fellow Dodgers, content creators. We had Clint from All Dodgers stop in, saying hi. Tim from Dodgers 2080, Mike Salas, Doom Sal, he's in the chat as well. We got a lot of stuff, coming for the channel here. Believe those podcasts, Talkin Blue here. Obviously DodgersBeat.com, but it's an exciting time to be a Dodgers fan. The offseason, in my mind, it's especially for someone who writes a lot, it's very fun to play with the roster and kind of take these rumors, even with a grain of salt, and see kind of where it takes you. What are your thoughts while we ended here? Dodgers offseason, like, are they done? Do you expect another big splash?
I think there's a move out there that's, every year we get a move that's maybe a little surprising. And I think we could say maybe Kirby Yates was that last once after they had already signed Tanner Scott, but they still need an outfielder of sorts, whether it's an everyday guy or some kind of platoon guy. They could always use an extra arm, or like you said, they could explore some of these things we talked about with Teo or Glasnow or Skubal. Like, there's a lot to go out there. I think something's gonna happen. I think Preller and Dipoto get the GM stuff of can't stay still type deals. Andrew Friedman can't stay still that long either. So I think there's something coming.
Yeah, I think we'll end on a high note here. I do think a move is coming. I don't know if it's going to be as big as Skubal. I've been telling Roger it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Been pushing this for almost 2 years now. Hasn't happened yet, but a lot of smoke out there right now. I'd be ecstatic if it does happen. More so for just the meltdown on social media. Kind of get a kick off that of ruining baseball.
Yeah.
But
At the very least, I think we got 11 days till Murakami has to sign. Not linked to the Dodgers, other than people trying to link him to the Dodgers because of the Japanese connection. But I am interested because we haven't heard anything on that yet. So
yeah, his market's winding down. But other than that, any closing thoughts here before we end the episode?
no, I'm glad to be talking Dodgers again. Glad to be talking Dodgers with you, and we'll be here as often as we can when things go down, or at least twice a week in the regular or in the off season. And it's a lot. Winter meetings always reminds me of when they first took over. Friedman and them first took over, and I remember staying up all night when like the Kemp, Pete Gordon, like all those trade rumors were going out, and they ended up making the trade with the Padres. And I remember like setting my alarm every 2 hours to wake up to see if anything had happened. So no, we're not quite there anymore with the Dodgers, but we're still getting moves done. So.
Yeah, that's an exciting time. Every time I wake up, there's always a potential of a new move being made late in the night, even on the West Coast time zone. But yeah, that'll do it for this first episode of Talkin Blue. Like Vince said, we're going to try to do this, weekly, maybe at least once or twice a week. Definitely around this time of the year with the winter meetings, had a lot to talk about. I'm sure those rumors are going to extend to next week as well. You can find us both on X at SnavelyCody6 and then at Vince since 91. We're both pretty active on there talking about the Dodgers. So feel free to show us a follow there and then subscribe to the channel. We had 25,000 followers on there. That was a huge milestone for us. We're looking to pump out more content. We got some player interviews from their signings, and then we had the foundation thing with Tommy Edman. That's all up on the YouTube channel as well, but we'll catch you guys on the next one. Go Dodgers.